And Alison Sargent is here with us in the newsroom to tell us what is making headlines around the world. Good to see you as always, Alison. I'm going to start with a very testy meeting over in Alaska. This is the first time Chinese and US officials have sat down together for the first time since Biden took office. And the Chinese didn't want to talk about Taiwan or Hong Kong or the Uyghurs. They wanted to talk about something that's happened in the United States this week.
That's right, Laura. They want to talk about anti-Asian racism in the United States. We can take a look at the front page of the Global Times. They do have a front page headline on these talks, I should say. But another one of their headlines here is Trump Western media blamed for anti-Asian crimes spike. Now, this comes after the Atlanta shooting in which 6 of the 8 victims were Asian American. And in their editorial, the Global Times asks, do Biden and the Democratic Party have the courage to reverse the propaganda war against China, which the paper sees as being responsible for this attack? Now, you could also argue that the Chinese press is really covering this story so heavily because it sort of feeds into China's propaganda war against the United States. In this cartoon from the China Daily, we see an Asian American family cowering against a wall where we see the shadow of a hooded KKK figure holding a gun behind them, and it's juxtaposed there with the Statue of Liberty.
And the Chinese papers are clearly using this for their own propaganda purposes, but some journalists in the United States agree with them, in fact.
Yeah, Asian Americans are scared for a reason. That's the headline from the New York Times' editorial today. They note that the shooter himself claimed he was motivated by a sex addiction, not racism, but the paper really doesn't buy that, and a lot of papers are saying the same thing as the New York Times. The New York Times also has an article explaining that for Asian women, racism and sexism have always been inextricably linked. One anthropology professor ties the stereotypes to the prostitution industry that sprang up to serve U.S. soldiers posted abroad during the Korean War. That really compounded stereotypes, the paper says, about Asian women as exotic sex objects. One woman who spoke to the paper described this attack as, quote, what we feared all along, that objectification and hypersexualization of our bodies was going to lead to death.
All right, let's move to a story a little bit closer to home then. We've all been placed back into lockdown for the next 4 weeks at least.
That's right. We can start, Laura, by looking at the French paper Libération's reaction to this, which I think summarizes the feelings of all of us. Putain, 1 month. For non-French speakers, I actually cannot translate all of this headline for you because
you're going to have to look that one up.
Yeah, I'm going to have to give that one up. We'd have to drop the F-bomb, which of course is not acceptable on air. The left-wing paper writes that the government's announcement yesterday was an admission of failure, even if they do continue to insist that France's strategy to hold off on putting the capital on lockdown until now was the right one. French papers are really united in their exasperation today. Le Figaro does not swear on their front page, but they do have a rare exclamation point here, reconfiné, locked down again. In their editorial, Le Figaro really lays into the French government for suspending the AstraZeneca vaccine just because other European countries did. They're also attacking the government for failing to acquire more vaccines and create a functional vaccine strategy. We're seeing similar criticism from the paper L'Opinion as well. In their front page cartoon here, we see Emmanuel Macron making what looks like a pretty half-hearted attempt at using a vaccine shot to douse out the flames of COVID-19. It's not enough, let it rip, he says to Prime Minister Jean Castex, who's standing by with that lockdown hose. Their headline is asking if lockdown season 3 is maybe going to be the breaking point for France.
Yeah, I think when will it end is the general feeling here in France today, isn't it? All right, well, another story here. A group of travellers from Algeria have been stranded at Charles de Gaulle Airport for 3 weeks.
That's right. Look, this group of around 24 people has been living in a terminal of the airport, sleeping on the ground and sleeping on chairs. According to Emirati paper The National, they flew from London just as Algeria discovered a strain of the UK virus variant and closed its borders with the UK, leaving them stranded in Paris. Now, the paper writes that they all have urgent reasons to go back to Algeria, and they've refused offers to send them back to London. One man said he'd given up his flat and his job, and so he simply couldn't go back. The National also explains that to control the coronavirus, Algeria has had a particularly strict border policy, and it's angered many ordinary Algerian expats who say that some elite Algerians who have sort of the right connections in the government have been able to travel back and forth when they haven't.
And these guys are stuck at the airport in a bit of a no man's land. All right, let's hope that situation resolves soon. Let's end with something a little bit more lighthearted then. We can both agree sushi is delicious. But would you change your name to salmon to get it for free? I'm not sure about that.
I know. Well, for dozens of people in Taiwan, the answer to that question was yes. The Guardian reports that some 150 people changed their names to get a free meal for 6 at a chain of sushi restaurants. Some of the names people chose included Salmon Prince and Explosive Good-Looking Salmon. So they really went to town on those name choices. I guess if you're going to change it, go big or go home.
Oh, yeah.
The Taiwanese government is now urging people, though, to stop the so-called salmon chaos. They're also reminding people that technically, according to the law, they can only legally change their names 3 times. And so if you miscalculate the name changes, you could end up getting stuck with a salmon name for good. I will say that the promotion only lasted for 2 days, and so it's too late for us, Laura. But it's kind of too bad because, as we were saying, Salmon Sergeant and Salmon Cellier do have a good
nice
ring
bit
to
of
them.
alliteration there. I like it. We could shorten it to Sally, couldn't we?
Yeah,
if
Sally.
we wanted to. All
Sam,
right.
Sally.
Alison, a.k.a. Salmon, thank you very much indeed for that.